ABSL Summit. Beyond Tomorrow. Building a Sustainable Future.
And now I leave you with two fantastic people to talk about it. The first one, Neil Usher, author of the Elemental Workplace and Elemental Change. We've got Online Connection. And Jaap Boogaard, head of EMEA Workplace Advisory from Colliers. The guys, the stage is yours.
Great, hello everyone. Fantastic to be here today in person. Quite a unique experience after such a long time working behind the screen. So very, very excited to see everyone, and everyone, many thanks for coming. My name is Jaap Boogaard. I'm heading up the workplace advisory team at Colliers across Europe, Middle East and Africa at Colliers. And we're currently working with many organizations on developing strategies for the post-COVID workplace. Why do people come to the office post-pandemic? How often? What's the impact on the size of the office? But also what's the impact on location and where offices will be located in the future? We will touch on those topics today in the discussion. Together with me today is Neil. Hey Neil, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, can you do a brief intro from your side before we kick off?
Yes, hello there. Great to be here, even though I'm still stuck behind a screen. I'm here in London. I've been in this business, corporate real estate, for almost 30 years. Worked for a number of large corporate occupiers. I'm currently working for an organization called GoSpace AI, which is leading edge technology for scheduling space in the workplace. Delighted to be here.
Great, thanks Neil. We would like to focus today briefly touch on some data and how people see the role of the office post-pandemic, but we'll keep that quite short. And then focus on how organizations are strategizing now. So what's happening now in the market and what are organizations doing now? And we will touch on the potential impact on location strategies of organizations. Before we go into the content, we'd like to ask you a question. Please raise your hand if you are planning to keep working from home post-pandemic 100% of your time. So you're not going back to the office. Seeing a couple of hands there. It's below 1%, so that's a very small percentage. Now please raise your hand if you are planning to go back to the office 100% of the time and not want to work from home post-pandemic. Also a very small percentage, 1%. This is exactly what we're seeing in many organizations. And I think this is not something new to us and not something groundbreaking. I think a lot of research have been done over the last period on remote working. We collected a lot of data ourselves as well about the balance between working remotely and working from the office. And the data is very, very consistent. We also compare data over time and looked at if is data changing or not. But the data is very consistent, also across a lot of other researches being done. Not a key topic of today, but I think important to address before we go further into detail. And I think a key question is how will this further be organized? So it's very, very likely that remote working is here to stay and that a balance needs to be found between working remotely and from the office. But how are we going to organize for that? And one key thing that we're seeing as well, also not very new, and a lot has been written and researched about that, is that the office is very likely to become more a place of collaboration. So we all read a lot, I think, in the press about the role of the office post-pandemic, potentially being more a place where people go to connect with their teams, to build culture, to grow a business. The question is, how will that be organized? And what we are seeing are some different approaches at organizations now. So we're working with organizations who are currently transforming their workplaces, transforming their offices. And some see the office and the office visit more as an event. So they see it as something that is a planned experience. You go there with a purpose and you go there on a certain moment in time. It's about booking a ticket, like at an event. You book a ticket before you go there. And it's better with friends. So you go there together with your colleagues on purpose on specific moments in time. We see organizations currently implementing these type of concepts in offices. Another approach that we're seeing is we'd like to make the comparison with the office as a pub. So if you go to a pub, it's usually more about a spontaneous visit. It's not always planned. It's more about socializing, but also connecting with others and more focus on random interaction. We also see organizations transforming offices at the moment to become more like a pub. Of course, combinations are very likely and possible as well. If we look at the approaches that organizations take at the moment, we sort of see three different approaches. One approach is, and that's a very small percentage because it could be quite risky as well, but we're working with some organizations doing that, is currently transforming offices before people return post-pandemic to create a complete new experience before people get back, but still maintaining a certain level of flexibility to be able to further optimize when more data comes in over the next period. But that's one approach. Second approach that we're seeing are organizations who start pilots. And more organizations start creating pilot areas or pilot floors in their existing buildings for teams to rotate through when they return to the office. The main ambition and idea behind that is to test different solutions and to use the data to make more well-informed decisions in the future. The third approach that we're seeing are organizations who hold, learn, but also wait with making significant changes to their offices and workplaces. Focus there is on having proper research methodologies in place to track how people return to the office, how often, but also what the impact is on the performance of the teams. So those are sort of the three different approaches that we're currently seeing with organizations that we are working with. Key thing that we would like to focus on today is how to select and create the places where people want to be. So it's not so much about forcing people to come back, but much more about creating interesting places where people want to be. And we want to briefly touch on the impact on location as well. So what I would like to do is look at sort of three different stages: the past, current, and looking to the future, which is very nearby. Looking at the past, there was often a strong focus on real estate and isolation. And what we saw over the last years, actually, also pre-pandemic, is that there was a move towards a stronger focus on the tenants. So who is actually going to occupy the building? What's the type of organization? What are their goals? What are their drivers? What we see now is that there's a trend more towards the people who will actually work in those buildings. So instead of looking at organizational level, more looking at the actual people who will be there in the future. And we see different things there related to health and well-being, which is a very big topic at the moment related to that, but also linked to diversity and inclusion. So we're working with an organization at the moment on a location strategy, and there diversity and inclusion and attracting a more diverse workforce plays a key role in selecting a location in the future. So what do certain minority groups want from a workplace? Where do they want to be located? But also, where are those groups located, and can we get closer to them in order to be able to attract them? So we see a much stronger focus on people and on the individual. Then looking at the office. Also, the offices were approached more in isolation in the past. What we see there is also pre-pandemic, a stronger focus on mixed-use offices. Example, in financial industry, we saw a lot of big financial firms opening offices more for fintech companies, for startups, for students, to create more collaboration with others. What we're seeing now is that more and more organizations start focusing more on creating a destination, which is much broader than just work. So it's not about having the office with multiple people and multiple organizations in it, but it's much more looking at, okay, how can we incorporate the wider community? How can we collaborate with hotels, with public libraries, with retail, residential? So it's much broader than just focus on work. Another thing that we're seeing a lot is also a stronger focus on bringing something back to that community. So another organization we're working with and developing a location strategy, we're very strongly looking at, okay, where can we make an impact as an organization? So it's not just focusing on the organization themselves, but also what location and what area is interesting to be to make a bigger impact in the community. And then finally, before I hand it over to Neil, it's more about marketing and how do we attract people to go to the office. In the past, a strong focus on marketing. We saw a move towards organizing more events to attract people to come to the office. And we see now that there's a much stronger focus on creating broader stories. So it's not just about an event, but people come to a place, people come to the office because other people share stories about that place and about that office. So it's broader than just events and marketing. It's about people who are intrinsically motivated to be somewhere, who share their stories, which attract other people to come. So marketing does not necessarily attract people to come to the office. It's much more the stories that people share. Neil, I'm going to hand it over to you. Can you focus a little bit more on how you see the office playing a role in sort of the environment it sits in?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. I think it's safe to say pre-pandemic, Most of the focus within large organizations in terms of the workplace was consolidation in city centres. So it created as much possibility for the talent they were sourcing to travel into those locations. That they were essentially, they effectively locked out the local community, because we would see large buildings created with the security barriers. And realistically, most organizations tried to ensure that their workplace would do as much as possible for as many people as possible in that space. Because at the end of the day, most people were spending most of their working week in that location. So increasing range of amenities, increasing range and quality of services in that space to ensure that those people who were spending sort of 8, 9, 10 hours a day would get as much out of the experience as possible. And experience became the buzzword. We wanted to make sure that that workplace, the time we were spending in it, the experience was maximized. But a lot of that's been called into question, because I think it's safe to say that for the first time, we're really starting to look at the role of the workplace as it relates to its immediate environment, the environment in which it sits. Because effectively, the workplace is surrounded by other types of real estate and other types of service. So we have retail, commercial, entertainment, leisure, residential, and we obviously also have the challenge of getting people into and out of our urban centres as well at the same time. And we're seeing the rise of sort of more sustainable types of travel, like e-scooters and e-bikes, and a lot more different types of variety of travel into and out of our cities. So for the first time, we're really facing not just a workplace challenge, but an entire urban challenge. I think it's a fantastic time to be in urban planning, because I think the ability of us all to share our knowledge and experience across these disciplines is probably the greatest it's ever been. But I think what we'd like to see in the future is our workplaces becoming much more integrated with their environment and with all of those other amenities and services. Every time a corporate occupier puts a cafe inside its workplace, it potentially means that local business from local operators of cafes is being denied. Every time an occupier puts a gym in the workplace, it means that the gym that's just around the corner is not getting business from the people who work for that organization. So if we want our cities to survive and thrive and to grow and to develop, what we really have to do is take a look at the workplace and ensure that it is far more integrated with the environment around it. Now, we're going to see more distribution of workplaces. We're going to see more local co-working spaces, more local offices being created. There will still be a role for the central, consolidated, in particular, sort of corporate headquarters type of facility. We don't expect to see this disappear at all. And we think there will be a variety of spaces in between, because we've become very focused on what it means to be living and working locally during the pandemic. As lockdowns were lifted in various countries, we started to explore our locality a lot more. We started to get to know a lot more of those amenities and those services that were on offer. Previously, we'd gone to the station, we'd passed them by. We'd gone, in the hours of darkness, we'd gone straight into the city centre, come home in the hours of darkness, and other than the weekend, really didn't have much experience of our locality. So we're discovering that a lot more as well, which leads to the idea, which is a sort of highly sustainable idea, of the 15-minute city, which I think is a fascinating concept and one that we need to explore a lot more. If we look at waste, we don't like to call it waste in the workplace, but pre-pandemic, most of the studies that GoSpace did and most of the studies that were done through industry showed that most large-scale corporate offices were occupied on average for around about 40 to 50% of their time, and at peak 60 to 65% of their time, which meant that we were over-providing corporate workplace at a grand scale. And that non-occupation of that space which is sitting empty, and on Fridays it was usually occupation levels of around about 15 to 20%, that is actually waste. We tend to think of environmental waste in tangible terms, but the non-use of that space was highly wasteful. We can't afford to continue to operate in that fashion. We have to seriously look at making sure that all of the space that is occupied is beneficially used as far as is possible. If we then take that occupation levels of around about a half, and we then look at a corporate workplace over 7 days of the week, 24 hours a day, and assuming that for 8 or 9 hours a day, it's only 50% in use, the actual beneficial use of a corporate building is somewhere around about 15% of its time. That is an incredible amount of wasted resource, particularly where a number of different sort of sectors of society are really sort of starved of the opportunity to meet in buildings and in physical space. So we also have an issue in relation to looking at the time that we make our workspaces available, not just the actual use during the working day. I did some work with a contact center organization in the Far East. They were using all of their buildings to sort of maximum benefit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we had the conversation around the fact that they were operating at a hugely, highly sustainable level by getting every last minute of usage out of their facilities and workplaces. But that's not the case in most city centres. And so the call really is for us to operate in a far more responsible way, a far more integrated way, looking at the way that workplaces integrate with their urban environments. And as we'll see on the next slide, the idea that we're going to offer is one of the minimum viable workplace. And it's fairly typical in workplace that we run a little bit behind technology in terms of terminology. IT got agile long before we ever did. Perpetual beta is another term here borrowed from the technology industry. But if we look at the minimum viable products and the method of delivery of a piece of software, most software developments fail because they focus unduly on functionality, trying to make the software work. And they forget about its reliability, its usability, and the actual user interface, how beautiful it is, how good it feels for us to use it. And so consequently, you can see the dotted line dropped from the peak of the pyramid there, which suggests that we have to deal with all of these things in proportion. Yes, it has to be functional, but we can't lose sight of its reliability, usability, and beauty in proportion with essentially it having to work. So I think what we can do is we can draw a distinction in the workplace in terms of what we actually need to operate a workplace, and then we can steadily and slowly take some steps into what it is we want from that workplace. So the minimum viable workplace is one which is intrinsically based on need rather than want. And that's where we have to seriously ask questions about whether the services, the amenities, the features, the facilities we're providing in a workplace, can they be provided in partnership with the local community and with the local urban environment, or do we have to provide them within that space, within that workspace or building? Is there a pressing reason why we can't integrate fully in a sustainable and in a community-driven way with what is around that workplace? So we're creating a workplace based on each of these 4 characteristics in proportion. We're integrating that community. By doing so, we are substantially minimizing the waste. We're going to get far more beneficial usage out of the space that we lease or the space that we buy. We're going to operate it in perpetual beta, which means it's never finished. It's a perpetual experiment. We heard that that a lot of corporates are moving into a pilot scheme for looking at hybrid working. An experiment is almost sort of one stage before that, really, which is where we're actually looking to seriously test some ideas, some of which will work and some of which won't work. But the idea of the workplace being in perpetual beta also means that the occupants of the space will help us to co-create it, co-design it. We will listen to them. I think in the last 18 months, with people being at home, it's probably the most that the workplace industry has ever listened to people about their experience of work and experience of the workplace. The depth and the breadth of our conversation with our colleagues is way beyond anything I've known it in the last 30 years. We have to make sure that we keep that conversation going and that process continues to roll on. But our workplaces will no longer be finished products. They will always be, just as the organization that occupies it, a work in progress, in perpetual beta. And we have to make sure that we enable these workplaces using the most advanced technology, getting into a situation where the ability of human beings to schedule and to plan for the use of workplace with variable attendance, we're just not capable of doing that anymore. And we have to use advanced technology to enable us to get that beneficial and maximum usage out of our workplace. So I offer you the idea of the minimum viable workplace as a sustainable, integrated, and responsible way to look at the workplace of the future.
Great, fantastic, Neil. Many thanks for sharing. We have a big red light flashing here saying time out, so we're running out of time. but I think we covered most of the things that we wanted to cover in the conversation today. I think it's going to be really, really interesting in the next period to experiment, as Neil mentioned, to collect data and to test different solutions and use that data to make more well-informed decisions in the future and share that data as well. So share it with each other so that we can all learn from each other. That's it from our side. Many thanks. If you want to know more or want to speak with us afterwards, at least I'm here around this afternoon as well. So happy to further discuss.
Resilience, maturity, talents, growth, innovation. The change made us stronger. This all made us sustainable. ABSL Summit. Beyond tomorrow. Building a sustainable future.